Well, good evening. Based just on the name of this group, which the presentation, which is Friday Night Bible Study, we do say good evening and welcome, and thanks for joining us. It is Friday, the 3rd of May, 2024, and I probably ought to be a little bit more faithful about dating each one of these so that it's clear when we record them. I don't always do that. It makes tomorrow Star Wars Day, May the 4th, be with you, and Sunday, Cinco de Mayo. Other than that, here we are. And we have had weather. It's weird. Our power went out briefly and multiple times. In fact, the on and off was so bad that it threw one of the breakers in the house. Now, that was the breaker that powered our internet router. So we had to reset the breaker to get internet back, even though a lot of the equipment that we access the internet through is on battery backup and doesn't go off. None of that went off. It was on, but we didn't have internet because we don't have battery backup on the modem and router. So, but that happened, what was that, about 8 or 9 o'clock last night?
Excuse me, what?
I was saying that happened, what, about 8 or 9 o'clock last night. I know I took a nap and got up and reset the clocks, and it was about 11:30 when I reset the clocks. So it was before then.
It was morning.
Well, the storm was this morning, but the power outage was not with the storm. We had the storm, didn't have any trouble with our power. We had a lightning storm come through. In fact, my wife's phone, after being hearing thunder for 5 minutes, tells us lightning has been detected in your area. I'm like we don't already know that. But anyway. And right now, it's sunny out. It's really pretty out now. So the storms have blown over, the clouds are gone. It's sunny and bright out. Makes me
And
glad.
it's cold.
What?
It's cold.
Oh, well. It might warm up, but if it warms up, the air conditioner will come on. So
Well, maybe if you come in here and turn on this little heater real quick.
in a moment, okay?
All right.
The weather has been a story all over the country. Earlier in the week, I watched a video of a tornado that struck a suburb west of Omaha, and I couldn't tell exactly where some of the photos were taken, but I had a pretty good idea about where because they were on a lake, and you could see houses on the other side of the lake, and there was a pool. Well, there is a particular suburb there west of Omaha that has a mini armed lake with houses around all the arms, and a lot of those houses have pools in the backyard. So it was probably from that area. Another interesting little exercise. I ran across a story. It was posted on YouTube, probably by the TV station that ran the story, about some illegal dams popping up in Texas. And it took me a little looking, but I was able to find one of the dams on Google Earth. The Google Earth photos were dated January of this year, and they're taking the dam down now because it was an illegal dam, and they're doing it at the expense of the people who put the dam up. So they went to all the expense of the concrete and the reinforcing steel and all that to build the dam. Now they're having to pay to have it taken out. If you're going to do something, make sure you've got the permits for it, I guess, is the lesson from that. Also out of Texas, the Harris County area, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Texas, Harris County is the county that includes Houston. Harris County is experiencing flooding. Now, the flooding this year is not as bad as the flooding associated with Hurricane Harvey, which that was in 2018, wasn't it? Because I made a trip to Texas, to the Houston area, right after Hurricane Harvey. There were still boats sitting in the median of the interstate. So I think that was late 2018 when Hurricane Harvey blew through. This flooding is not that bad, but the San Jacinto River is expected to crest today at about 77 feet above sea level, which is some 17 to 22 feet above its normal level. Stop and think about it. You stand 6-foot men standing on each other's heads, and the top one would be at 18 feet, so his neck would be up out of the water. That's how deep the water would be in places because that river's flooding. So they're calling for evacuations in parts of Harris County to get people away from the floodwaters. Oh, you wanted me to come in there and turn the heater on. I'll be right back in a moment. Keep them entertained. Say something.
Thank you.
The neat thing is, right here off to my right, is the cat that normally doesn't show up. They got treated for fleas on the first of the month, and that usually makes her feel sick, and she goes and hides for a couple of days. She came out last night and came and sat on my desk for a while, and now she's in here, and at the moment she's grooming, so she's apparently feeling better. It's rather unusual for her to be in here while we're recording our Friday night Bible study, so I doubt she'll come up onto my lap where you could see her, but there she is. So, I don't think we have anything else in way of preliminaries. It's probably time for us to bow our heads, have a prayer, and we'll get started with our Bible study. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you for the week that is past, for the protection that we have received. And we do ask for help and comfort for those who were harmed by the weather or whatever during the week. And now we ask that you will send your Spirit to give us assistance in understanding what we read from your written word, that we might come to know you better and be more completely conformed to your character. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So,
Have you checked to make sure you have sound?
yes, I recorded a short snippet just a few minutes ago and listened to it, played it back to make sure I had sound. So,
Okay, because I can't do that the way we're doing it now.
yeah,
I can't check.
because you don't have access to it, right? Because it won't. We're not doing it live, so it's not where she can monitor it from her own computer. At any rate, we have been reading from the book of Genesis, the story of a rather dysfunctional and toxic family. There are places elsewhere in the Bible where God talks about Israel. And he tells them he didn't choose them because they were more numerous than other people, because there were very few of them at the time. And he didn't choose them because they were more righteous than the people around them. Because as we're finding out here, they weren't. Now, there are people who will try to tell you that the people of Canaan were terrible, wicked, evil people who earned their demise by their idolatrous and violently idolatrous practices and by their sexual debauchery. But you know, in our sermon presentation last week, we read the words of Amos, and the sins of the people surrounding Israel at that time didn't include idolatry and so forth, even though those people engaged in it. Only the people of God, the Israelites and Jewish people, were condemned for idolatry because they made a pretense of worshiping the Creator. So for them, idolatry was a problem that God didn't see it was for the people who weren't pretending to worship the Creator. So when we look at it that way, it is hard to make the argument that the people of Israel were somehow more righteous than the people around them. And as we read and continue reading these stories, we're going to see how toxic and, well, we've already seen some of how toxic and messed up they were. We have two sons of Jacob wiping out an entire city by deceiving them, and then actually going in while they're weak and injured and physically destroying them all. And we have Reuben going to bed with his father's concubine. So we've got up chapter 36. Chapter 36 is going to give us a brief respite from the insanity of this family, perhaps only because it's not a historical account. It is rather a genealogy. And it's not a genealogy of Jacob. It's not a genealogy particularly of Ishmael or of anybody else. It's a genealogy of Esau. And this is going to be rather interesting for us to read through, because we're going to come across some names that become important later in the Old Testament narrative and in the history of the people of Israel.
A question?
And we're going to see that it appears, of course, we don't really know, because the story isn't told in as much detail about Esau as it is about Jacob, because Jacob ended up being the forefather and ancestor to the Israelite nation. But it does seem as if Esau's family wasn't as bad off as was Jacob's. Like I say, we don't know. We can't say for sure. It may only seem that way because we get more detailed information about Jacob's family than we do about Esau's. Now, you had a question?
Yes, I do. Is this where we're going to learn about who Hazel Pony was?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Because I had forgotten who she was. She's somebody's sister.
Mm-hmm. This is the account of the descendants of Esau, also known as Edom. Edom meant red, and Esau was born red and hairy, and so he got both names. And the country became known not so much as Esau as Edom. Esau married two young women from Canaan. Well, he lived there, why wouldn't he? Ada, the daughter of Eli the Hittite, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, and granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite. He also married his cousin Basemath, who was the daughter of Ishmael and the sister of Nebaioth. Ada, that's the Hittite girl, gave birth to a son named Eliphaz for Esau. Basemath gave birth to a son named Reuel. Aholibamah gave birth to sons named Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. All these sons were born to Esau in the land of Canaan. Probably these were all born before Jacob returned, and some of them may have been born before Jacob even left. Because remember that Esau was married and his wives were a thorn in Rebekah's side, so to speak, long before Jacob got sent away. That was the excuse she gave to her husband Isaac for sending her son away, even though she was really doing it in hopes she could save his life from his brother. So,
I don't buy her excuse.
well, yeah, we're not covering that right now. We've talked about that before. He also married his cousin.
Considering the kind of woman she was,
Yeah.
I just don't think she had any. It would have been rather hypocritical of her to not like heathen women, considering her background.
Yeah, well,
Anyway, go ahead.
Ada, she was the Hittite girl, gave birth to Eliphaz, who becomes a very important character in the history of Esau. Basemath, that's the daughter of Ishmael, gave birth to Reuel. And then Aholibamah, the Hivite girl, gave birth to Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. And as we were saying, all these sons were born to Esau in the land of Canaan. At some point, and apparently this is before Jacob returned, although the reason makes it sound like it was after Jacob returned, Esau took his wives, his children, and his entire household, along with his livestock and cattle, all the wealth he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and moved away from his brother Jacob. There was not enough land to support them both because of all the livestock and possessions they had acquired. So Esau, also known as Edom, settled in the hill country of Seir. But when we read the story of Jacob's return from Padan Aram, his brother was in Seir, so he moved away while Jacob was away at Padan Aram. But it's possible that this move took place even before then, because, well, I don't know. I wonder where he got all his flocks and herds. He wasn't interested in flocks and herds, and yet now he has a whole lot of them. And that might be because he ended up with his father's flocks and herds. And Jacob got his own while he was away in Padan Aram. So Jacob didn't hold him to the bargain they made over the mess of pottage when they were younger. At any rate, at some point, Edom did move to the hill country of Seir, and that became the land where the people descended from Esau lived for a very long time, into the days of the divided kingdom of Israel and Judah. This is the account of Esau's descendants, the Edomites, who lived in the hill country of Seir. These are the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, the son of Esau's wife Ada, and Reuel, the son of Esau's wife Basemath. The descendants of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kenaz. Timnah, the concubine of Esau's son Eliphaz, gave birth to a son named Amalek. These are the descendants of Esau's wife Adah. Now, Adah, the name Adah appears earlier in the book of Genesis. That was the name given to one of the wives of the man who asked for Lamech. Lamech, yeah. If Cain was avenged 7 times, I'll be avenged 77 times. Adah and Zillah were the names of his wives. So this is a name that gets brought back. It's obviously a different person because it's a very different time in the earth's history. Now, you may recognize one of the names we just read there in verse 12. Amalek. Have you ever heard of Amalekites? Amalekites would be the descendants of Amalek. Amalek, it tells us here, was the son of Eliphaz and his concubine Timnah. Now, this is perhaps one of the first instances of it, but throughout the Old Testament, we're going to run across some other instances where the son of a concubine turns out to be the cause of a lot of violence and trouble. And Amalek, if we can be believed, eventually led to not only waylaying the people of Israel on their way from Egypt to Canaan, but also being the source of Haman in the book of Esther. So that there was a lot of trouble that came Israel's way based on this one individual, Amalek, the son of Eliphaz and Timnah. And Eliphaz was the apparently firstborn son of Esau. And we'll have more to say about that name. One of Eliphaz's sons, we read in verse 11, was Teman. So keep that name in.
One of Job's.
We'll get there. You're spoiling.
Oh.
You're engaging in spoilers.
That's the same name.
Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. These are the descendants of Esau's wife Adah, end of verse 12. The descendants of Reuel were Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mizah. These are the descendants of Esau's wife Basemath. Now remember, that's the daughter of Ishmael, so these sons of Esau would have been grandsons of Ishmael. Esau also had sons through Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah and the granddaughter of Zibeon. Their names were Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. These are the descendants of Esau who became the leaders of various clans. The descendants of Esau's oldest son, Eliphaz, became the leaders of the clans of Teman, Omar, Zepho, Kenaz, Korah, Gatam, and Amalek. Remember that Amalek is a grandson of Esau, and yet he ended up becoming the head of a whole clan or tribe of Edomites. These are the clan leaders in the land of Edom who descended from Eliphaz. All these were descendants of Esau's wife Adah. The descendants of Esau's son Reuel became the leaders of the clans of Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mizah. These are the clan leaders in the land of Edom who descended from Reuel. All these were descendants of Esau's wife Basemath. And recall that it's very explicit in the narrative that Basemath was a cousin to Esau. The descendants of Esau and his wife Aholibamah became the leaders of the clans of Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. These are the clan leaders who descended from Esau's wife Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah. These are the clans descended from Esau, also known as Edom, identified by their clan leaders. So we've just gone over essentially the tribes of Edom, or of the descendants of Esau. These are the names of the tribes that descended from Seir the Horite. They lived in the land of Edom: Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anah, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishan. These were the Horite clan leaders, the descendants of Seir, who lived in the land of Edom. So that gives us understanding that Seir was not just the name of the land, but it was the name of an individual who settled in that land and whose descendants then kind of took it over, and they were known as Horites. And so they lived in the land of Edom along with the descendants of Esau. The descendants of Lotan were Hori and Heman. Lotan's sister was named Timnah. So most likely this is the Timnah that became a concubine to Eliphaz. The descendants of Shobal were Alvan, Manahath, Ebal, Shepho, and Onam. The descendants of Zibeon were Aiah and Anah. This is the Anah who discovered the hot springs in the wilderness while he was grazing his father's donkeys. So, hot springs are nothing new. They were found way back then somewhere in the land of Edom. The descendants of Anah were his son Dishon and his daughter Aholibamah. So we're reading history leading up to the time of Edom, and so that Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, was a Horite. She was part of this clan that lived there where Esau eventually moved. The descendants of Dishon were Hemdan, Eshban, Ithron, and Karen. The descendants of Ezer were Bilhan, Zavon, and Achan. The descendants of Dishan were Uz and Aaron. So these were the leaders of the Horite clans: Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anah, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishan. The Horite clans are named after their clan leaders who lived in the land of Seir. So it's not clear. It appears that these people lived along with the Edomites, and it's clear that they did intermarry because Esau married some of them. Esau's son married at least one of them. So there was probably quite a bit of intermarriage with these people until they kind of became indistinguishable, all one nation and people, known as Edom, after Esau. Now we conclude this particular chapter with a section that this version titles The Rulers of Edom. These are the kings who ruled in the land of Edom before any king ruled over the Israelites. Now I missed a footnote there. The descendants of Dishon, and there's a footnote there. Hebrew is Dishan, a variant spelling of Dishon. Compare 36:21 and 28. And then 36:31 says, before an Israelite king ruled over them. We know that for a time the people of Edom became ruled by the Hebrew kings. And that, I believe, happened during the time of David. So that it might not be just before any king ruled over the Israelites, but before any Israelite king ruled over the Edomites. Although, given that David was only the second king, that would be essentially the same, saying about the same thing. Bela, son of Beor, who ruled in Edom from his city of Dinhaba. When Bela died, Jobab, son of Zerah from Basra, became king in his place. Now, there are interpreters who read this and they look at the first three letters of that name and they say, could this be the man of the story in the book of Job? So, if that's the case, then Job would have been king of Edom. The story, as it's related in the book of Job, isn't very explicit about it. It doesn't tell us who he was. We just know that he was a wealthy man and that he suffered considerable losses when the accuser attacked him, having been given permission by God to attack, but only so far. So one of the things that tells us is that these bad things happen at the hand of the accuser, not at God's hand. Now, the other thing that lends some credence to this idea is that one of Job's miserable comforters is named Eliphaz the Temanite. So it is possible that Teman, a son of Eliphaz, had a son or grandson named after his ancestor, named Eliphaz, and because he was descended from Teman, he was known as a Temanite. So Eliphaz the Temanite is one of the three persons who came to visit Job and supposedly commiserate with him in his misery, but then insisted on their own view of life against the reality of what they were observing, and ended up in the process accusing Job of being an evil man. Return to God and you'll be in good shape, they said. But that's kind of outside of what it is here. But that is a possibility. We can't prove it. But it is possible that the Job of the book of Job was this Jobab, son of Zerah from Basra, who became king of Edom. When Jobab died, Husham from the land of the Temanites became king in his place. When Husham died, Hadad, son of Bedad, became king in his place and ruled from the city of Avith. He was the one who defeated the Midianites in the land of Moab. When Hadad died, Samlah from the city of Masrekah became king in his place. When Samlah died, Shaul from the city of Rehoboth on the river became king in his place. When Shaul died, Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, became king in his place. When Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, died, Hadad became king in his place and ruled from the city of Pau. So there's a second Hadad in the thing, and there's a footnote for that. As in some Hebrew manuscripts, the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Syriac version, see also 1 Chronicles 150. Most Hebrew manuscripts read Hadar instead of Hadad, so that they're actually using a different name there. His wife was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred and the granddaughter of Mezahab. And we don't have any way to know who those persons were, but apparently it meant something to the original audience for the book of Genesis, and that's why it's included here. These are the names of the leaders of the clans descended from Esau, who lived in the places named for them: Timnah, Alva, Jetheth, Aholabama, Elah, Pinon, Kenaz, Teman, Mizbar, Magdiel, and Iram. These are the leaders of the clans of Edom, listed according to their settlements in the land they occupied. They all descended from Esau, the ancestor of the Edomites.
Now I have a question for you.
All right?
What is the purpose in us knowing all this ancestry? Why is it included?
Well, there are people for whom genealogy is a very important study. And in the Hebrew culture, genealogy was very important. If you doubt that, read through, as we will eventually, the books of Chronicles. The books of Chronicles are laden with chapter after chapter after chapter of genealogies of the people of Israel.
Okay, how does this bring us closer to God?
Well, only by noting the relationship so that we understand the story better, and then in the story, we see God dealing with messed up humans, and we come to know Him better in that way.
Okay.
It's of historical interest essentially only. For
Okay.
example, we learned where the Amalekites come from. They are descendants of Esau's son Eliphaz and his half-legitimate son Amalek. They were considered half-legitimate because they were the sons of a concubine. As a concubine didn't have all the rights of a wife, and the concubine's children did not have all the rights of a son of a regular wife. Moving on, now we get back to the story of Jacob and his family, and we get back to the insanity. Genesis 37. So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, that is, the four sons of Jacob's concubines. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Now, some people
Everybody
think,
loves a cowtail.
yeah, some people think that when it says brothers here, it is speaking of all of them, and that Joseph may have been the one to report on the little consort between Reuben and Bilhah. But Reuben was not one of the sons of Bilhah or Zilpah. He was the son of Leah. And it says here that the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah were the ones that Joseph worked for. Jacob, and I think that footnote A is going to say that it's Israel. The Hebrew is Israel. See the note on 35:21 where it says that the terms Jacob and Israel were often interchanged. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. That seems a little bit odd.
So was Benjamin.
Huh?
So was Benjamin.
Well, yeah, Benjamin far more so than the others, because if we can believe the narrative, Joseph was at most 7 years younger than his oldest brother. So, if Jacob was 80 when he got there, he'd have been pushing 90 to 100 by the time Joseph was born. So yeah, he's the son of his old age, but all of his sons were born when he was in his 80s and 90s, except perhaps Benjamin, who was born later. But that's what it says. We mostly believe that Joseph was the oldest son of Jacob's preferred wife, Rachel, and that is why Jacob favored him over his 10 other sons. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. Footnote B. Traditionally rendered a coat of many colors. The exact meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. So maybe it was colorful or maybe it was just
Back
beautiful.
up a bit.
Okay, what you're saying something?
Yeah, can we back up a bit?
Sure.
I'm thinking too why Joseph would have been the favorite son and the family dynamics. How was Jacob treating his wives? He had a favorite.
Absolutely.
How was he treating the four? Were they treated equally? I'm guessing that the answer is no. Did these sons see the unfairness of how their mothers were treated, especially the sons of the concubines,
Well,
whose
yeah.
mothers were slaves?
Almost certainly, yeah.
And how would they react toward their dad when they see what they perceive to be mistreatment? Would they not rebel?
Well, it seems that all of them ended up in a state of rebellion against their father, as we shall see. All 10 of them. But those 4 in particular, yes, probably so.
Well, didn't I say especially? I wasn't speaking of them exclusively.
Right, right.
I'm thinking of people today when children are raised in a home where where mom is treated without the respect and love that she deserves, simply based on the fact that she's a human being.
Yeah.
But not only did she not get that, she was also a woman. And as a woman, she was treated as a non-person.
Yeah. Reading on.
By those actions, Jacob would have brought this rebellion upon his own head.
Well, absolutely. And you know, the trouble that Laban had with Jacob, didn't he have a hand in bringing it on himself
Well, yeah.
by the way he treated him? And you know, what's going on with Jacob? May that not have been in part a result of his father providing preferential treatment for Esau?
Maybe.
Like we say, we're dealing with a dysfunctional, toxic family here, with a lot of very negative dynamics taking place. And these things tend to get passed on from one generation to the next. Verse 4, but his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. In other words, resentment. One night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and all your bundles and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. Here's an unfortunate trait of being a favored son. there may have been a sense of invulnerability. It did not take the wisdom of the ancient to figure out what this dream meant. And Joseph had a level of wisdom when it comes to dreams. So he had to know what this dream meant. Why would he tell his brothers? Because, most likely, he had this, he's 17 at the time, right? He had this teenage sense of invulnerability. You know, teenagers about this age, in our day, get in cars and drive fast. They think they can't be harmed. They think they're invulnerable. And they end up hanging dead from a tree branch somewhere.
As the favored son, he felt superior.
He probably did feel superior, and he probably also felt that his dad would protect him. So there was that sense of invulnerability as well. Otherwise, anybody with Joseph's level of intelligence should have known better than to tell a dream like this to the very objects of the dream, namely his brothers. His brothers responded, "So, you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon, Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. I mean, you know, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing and expecting a different result. He's already seen the result, or he should have, of his telling this kind of dream. But he gets another dream, so he opens his mouth and tells it too. "Listen, I've had another dream," he said. "The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me." This time he told his dream to his father as well as to his brothers, but his father scolded him. "What kind of a dream is that?" he asked. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you?" But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. Should we talk about dreams at this point?
Well, my understanding is that it has come to be believed that dreams are our mind's way of sorting out the garbage that we've been throughout our life and putting it away.
Yeah, it's the brain processing data and determining what should be kept and what should be discarded. And I have seen this demonstrated. If you are learning things and you're learning them in a sequence, I saw this when my dad was doing a week of prayer for an elementary school. The kids could recall, let's say it was Wednesday, they could recall what was going over Monday because my dad went over it again on Tuesday. But they couldn't remember what he had done on Tuesday until Thursday, because then when he reiterated it on Wednesday, on Thursday they could remember it. Anything that gets repeated on a second day, then your brain says this must be important and keeps it. Whereas if you only run across it once, your brain might decide that's not important and toss it into your brain's trash bin where it gets lost overnight. So yeah, that may be what dreams are. People have tended to believe throughout history that dreams were harbingers of the future, omens of what was going to happen at some point in the future. And that fascination with dreams continues throughout the story here, but even appears in the book of Daniel, where the king Nebuchadnezzar has a dream and decides that it's an important dream and seeks help in interpreting the dream. And Joseph himself is going to gain a reputation as an interpreter of dreams. Now, what we know about the dreams that he has related here is that these dreams will, in fact, come true. That Jacob's father and his father's wife, not his mother, because his mother's deceased by now, and his brothers will all come to Egypt and bow low before him, even after they find out who he is. So Jacob finds it unlikely that he and his wife and his sons would actually come and bow to the ground before Joseph. But before he dies, that actually comes true. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. Well, what do we know about Shechem?
A bad place for them to be going.
Yeah. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, "Your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready, and I will send you to them." "I'm ready to go," Joseph replied. "Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along," Jacob said. "Then come back and bring me a report." Is Jacob expecting his favorite son to spy for him? We know already that he's reported on at least 4 of his brothers and told his dad what these brothers were doing. Is Jacob now explicitly sending his son out to bring back a report about what his sons are doing?
Might it be not a case of, let me know if my sons are still alive? Considering where they went and what their history was?
Well, I suppose that's possible, although he includes the flocks in his orders to Joseph.
Flocks can be stolen.
Yeah. So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. Hebron, we know where Hebron is. Hebron is still there today. It was David's first capital city, and we mentioned in our sermon presentation last week that Tekoa, the home city of Amos, was roughly halfway between Hebron and Jerusalem, which eventually became David's capital. So that gives us an idea where they were. And that's where Jacob was staying when he sent Joseph to Shechem. And we know why Jacob wasn't living there anymore. He felt like he didn't dare. "I'm looking for my brothers." Oh, wait a minute. Skip the verse. When he arrived there, a man from the area noticed him wandering around the countryside. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "I'm looking for my brothers," Joseph replied. "Do you know where they are pasturing their sheep?" "Yes," the man told them. "They have moved on from here, but I heard them say, 'Let's go on to Dothan.'" So Jacob followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there. Now, I have heard an interpretation of this which says that this act of his brothers of traveling from Shechem to Dothan was an act of rebellion against their father. That it was their father's responsibility to negotiate grazing rights for his flocks and herds, and that his sons were supposed to go where he directed them. But I can also imagine a reason why these men may have decided not to hang around Shechem. Can you?
Yeah. Say it again.
And the narrative here doesn't really fill us in on what's going on. It just says, and we don't even know why it would tell us this bit. Joseph got sent to Shechem. He gets there. His brothers aren't there. He talks to somebody in the area. They know where his brothers went. They tell him where, and he goes there, and he finds his brothers.
All right, I'm going to have a little issue with this. If it is Jacob's responsibility to secure the rights to use the pasture land, why did he send his sons to Shechem?
Well, that's the thing that leads me to doubt that particular interpretation. I'm just sharing it because I have heard it.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
But
unless he wanted to get rid of his kids. And I don't see that.
well, let's go back to verse 12. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. It doesn't say whose decision it was to do that. However, Jacob apparently knew where they were going because he tells Joseph, your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready and I will send you to them. So did he arrange it? Did he specifically send them there? Or did they want to go there for whatever twisted reason they might have had, and their father knew where they were going?
We're going there whether you like it or not, Dad. Dad is worried and he sends his other son to make sure that they're safe. Just to ease his mind.
Well, it's possible that if Joseph is 17 and if the narrative earlier is right and the oldest of them is only 7 years older, that's only 24. So these are all still very young men in their teens and early 20s.
Without a fully formed prefrontal
cortex, yeah. And
Yeah.
again, that youthful sense of invulnerability, they may have felt comfortable going to Shechem just because what's going to happen to us. And it is also possible that while they were there, they heard some things and saw some things or had some contacts with people that led them to decide, oh, maybe hanging around here isn't such a good idea. Because whenever you engage in genocide, because that's essentially what Simeon and Levi did in Shechem, you can never be thorough enough so that there aren't relatives left behind to resent what you have done. And so here in the Shechem area, there may well have been some people who resented what Simeon and Levi had done, and here they are pasturing their flocks right there in their own territory. Might they have begun to plot to not only get revenge for what had been done, but to enrich themselves by stealing some of Jacob's flocks? And once the 10 brothers It's likely there were 10 because Benjamin most likely stayed at home. That's the impression we'll get later. That likely then the 10 brothers made a decision. Not a good idea for us to stay here. Let's go somewhere else. And so they went to Dothan. Reading on then, verse 18. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Now, at least according to the narrative here, these brothers are planning to kill their own brother. Half brother, but their own brother. And we can see that from people like Simeon and Levi, who thought very little of going into a city and killing every male in the city. Murder doesn't seem to bother them that much. So, murder your brother? Well, after he's done what he's done, it's a disproportionate response, but you can see that they might have had a level of incentive to do what they're planning to do here. And if they kill him, pretty clear they won't ever end up bowing low before him, will they? So they say, then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Let's not kill him, he said. Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. And then the narrative suggests that Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. Now, what do we see about Reuben's character here?
Growth in the right direction.
Well, possibly. Remember, Reuben is the oldest. There's Reuben, then Simeon, then Levi, then Judah. And the murder plot, we could, based on what we know of the brothers already, we might be able to attribute that primarily to Simeon and Levi. There's another plot that will come from Judah, as we'll see in a moment. But Reuben opposes them, and he tells them, we can do this and he will eventually die, but then he won't die at our hands. Reuben has in his character a level of compassion that his brothers don't seem to share. And I wonder, because in my experience, that level of compassion, that trait of character, does seem to be linked to a weakness in sexual matters. Reuben was the one who took his father's concubine to bed. Reuben is the one here who shows a level of compassion for his younger brother Joseph. It is possible that those traits are linked in some way. Are you asleep or are you just ignoring me?
I'm trying to figure you out.
Why?
Why? Because if I don't figure you out, I'm not going to buy it.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to figure out what you're saying.
I'm
How
just
is having sex with his father's concubine an act of compassion?
I didn't say it was an act of compassion. I said that weakness in sexual matters does tend to be linked to a compassionate character. They're not necessarily the same thing, they just do sometimes seem to be linked in the same person.
So people who want sex are more compassionate than ice blocks.
Who doesn't want sex? I asked you a question.
Well, I'm trying to think of someone.
Yeah, there are some aberrations out there, but that's pretty few and far between. I was talking about the weakness in sexual matters, the tendency to misuse sex. The preachers who end up having relations with a member and get themselves put out of the ministry for it.
You've still got me confused. I have no idea what you're fishing for.
I'm not fishing for anything. I'm just making an observation, and
Well, okay, I'm not following you, so move on.
we might run across this elsewhere in the Bible, but to me, I think I've seen it in real life that people with weaknesses in sexual matters have a tendency to be more compassionate than the people who are very strong on sexual matters, would never even dream of having sex with anyone other than the one wife for life. Just saying. Anyway. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now, the cistern was empty, there was no water in it. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Gilead is in the area east of Jordan. It's the place where the Transjordan tribes would get their land. Gilead was known as a place, as a source of things such as the balm. The familiar text, "Is there no balm in Gilead?" which then became the source of the spiritual, "There's a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul." So they've come from there, and they're taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. And I'm just curious what another version might say there.
That'd be a good name for a church.
Says here, in the NIV, they render it, their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. So the Ishmaelites have established themselves as transporters. You go somewhere, you buy something that somebody else wants, you travel to that somebody else, you sell it to them, you make a profit to pay for the effort of doing the transportation and to support yourself. So they see these Ishmaelite traders traveling toward Egypt from nearby. And so Judah said to his brothers, verse 26, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime." Footnote C, cover his blood. Okay. Of course, they had to cover up the crime anyway, but instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled them out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. Midianite. The Midianites will appear again and again. Midian was he one of the sons of Ishmael?
I don't know.
Let me go back and look real quick. He was a son or grandson of Ishmael, as I recall.
Human trafficking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you want to hear an interesting story on human trafficking, go to YouTube and look up Georgia Tam. I don't remember if it's Tamm or Tann.
Yeah, somebody who operated in the Memphis area.
Yeah, not that long ago.
Yeah, my wife actually believes that her grandmother may have been a victim of this Georgia Tam. There's no way to prove it, but it's a possibility, and the timing would be about right. I'm going back looking for the genealogy of Ishmael because I think it's located here somewhere. Yes, Ishmael's sons. This is the account of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Sarah's maidservant Hagar the Egyptian bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael listed in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Abdil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. These were the sons of Ishmael, and these were the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. Altogether, Ishmael lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the border of Egypt, as you go to Asher, and they lived in hostility toward all their brothers. So that doesn't name Midian. Let me resort to a Bible dictionary here. See what it says. It sticks in my head that we do know the genealogy of Ishmael to Midian. Oh, no, I'm wrong. Midian was not a descendant of Ishmael. Midian was the son of Abraham's second wife, Keturah, or perhaps the son of a concubine. Ishmael himself was the son of a concubine, was he not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I I got a little confused there. Yes, Midian was one of the sons of Abraham, sons that he sent away. He gave money to them and sent them away so that they wouldn't interfere with the inheritance of Isaac. So, it tells us here that it's Judah's idea to sell him as a slave to the Ishmaelites. And I mean, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites are separate peoples. So this term Midianite traders may simply mean that they had worked out a deal with the Midianites to trade, to do the transportation for their trade with Egypt, and that the goods that they're carrying come from the people of Midian. That's a possibility anyway. I wouldn't tell you that for certain. So when the Ishmaelites or Midianite traders came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt. D. 20 shekels, which is about 8 ounces or 228 grams in weight. Now, some people have pointed out, and I haven't looked up the location of these places, that in traveling from Dothan to Egypt, Joseph would have ridden close to his father's pasture lands and the tents of his father, that he might even have been able to see them, and they use that to add a little drama to the story. Here's this 17-year-old boy, now a captive, a slave, being hauled away to a foreign country, and he has to ride right by his home. Can't say, haven't researched that to see if that was likely, but that's what I've heard. Sometime later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern. Remember, he's the one that suggested they put him there, and he intended to sneak him out and send him back home without his brothers knowing about it. When he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief. Then he went back to his brothers and lamented, "The boy is gone. What will I do now?" Apparently, he didn't know what Judah and the others had done, and it sounds like they didn't bother to tell him. They weren't going to admit to him and have him possibly tell their dad what was up.
They'd have to share the 20 or the coins.
Yeah. Then the brothers killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. They sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message: "Look at what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son?" Now, the language here suggests they didn't take it to him. They sent a messenger servant to their father carrying the coat. And let's see here. The NIV renders it the ornamented robe. And the NIV says they took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, "We found this, examine it and see whether it is your son's robe." Looking at a more literal version, the New American Standard Bible, and see how it renders that. So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the vari-colored tunic and brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Please examine it to see whether it is your son's tunic or not." So the more literal version uses sent. This highly interpretive version uses sent. The more interpretive than literal, but the less interpretive than this version, the NIV, says took it to them. I'd hazard a guess that they didn't leave the flocks yet. They sent it to their father. And that way they didn't have to be there when he examined the robe. Their father recognized it immediately. "Yes," he said, "it is my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him. Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap or sackcloth. He mourned deeply for his son for a long time. His family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "I will go to my grave mourning for my son," he would say, and then he would weep. Footnote E, go down to Sheol. Sheol's the place of the dead. So he didn't, the traditional interpretation of Sheol is hell. He didn't say, "I'm going to go to hell mourning for my son." He meant very literally what this version renders it as: "I will go to my grave mourning for my son." And again, let's look at the more literal version here. Well, the more literal version just renders it, "Surely I will go down to Sheol in mourning for my son." So his father wept for him. And in interest of just reading all these versions here, let's see what it says. "No," he said, "in mourning I will go down to the grave to my son." So his father wept for him. So the grave is probably the best interpretation of what Jacob intends to say here. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders, or the Midianites, the relationship between the Midianites and Midianites is unclear. Compare 37:28 and see also 25 verse 2. And I'll just for curiosity's sake, let's look at 25 verse 2. Medan and Midian. Okay. I don't know why the relationship between the Midianites and Midianites is unclear. Midian and Medan were both sons of Abraham and Keturah. So, anyway. Meanwhile, the traders arrived in Egypt, where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was captain of the palace guard.
Does that mean he was also captain of the prison?
There has been speculation to that effect. Captain of the palace guard, the guard is there to protect Pharaoh himself. Potiphar is called an officer of Pharaoh. And in those days, in that violent culture, you did not assign somebody to be in charge of your guard, or as we'll read in the next chapter, do other particularly important functions, unless you explicitly trusted them. Captain of the palace guard was too important a position in the security of the king from those who resented his rulings or wanted to be king in his place to be trusted to anybody that you didn't know would be loyal to you. So Potiphar here has
Didn't actually punish.
what?
He didn't actually punish Joseph.
Well, you're getting way ahead of our story.
Yeah, I am.
I'm just actually going over his importance in the land of Egypt. Who was it that played Potiphar in that movie version that we have somewhere? Was that Ben Kingsley?
I don't know.
I think it was.
To me, he looks a lot like Patrick Stewart. Right? For a long time, I couldn't tell them apart.
No. So, looking at how long we've been going, we're about 5 minutes short of our usual time here. But we know that the next chapter is going to be involved, and it won't be something that we want to go through very quickly here. So I don't want to get started on another chapter. So I think we're going to call our little Friday night Bible study here complete for this week, and plan to continue with Genesis chapter 38 next week. Does that sound about right?
Sounds good to me. Can I see you when you're done?
Yeah.
Right.
So, as I just said, we will continue with Genesis chapter 38 next week here on our Friday night Bible study. We hope you'll see fit to join us then. And until then, we do say goodbye and God bless.
Bye, everyone.